A blundering cop swung his baton and blasted the window of a just arrived black family's SUV. Convinced he was schooling a suspect, he puffed up, certain the neighborhood would applaud. Within minutes, he'd be on his knees, begging forgiveness. Where are you watching tonight? Kick back, subscribe, and follow this story to its startling cliff. We open in a place convinced the world's ugliness can't breach its iron gates, but trouble never knocks. It strolls in wearing a badge and an attitude. This isn't a tale of paperwork and policies. It's about pride, power, and the thin line between safety and control. Stay with me until the last frame because reputations will crack louder than glass and streets remember. Tonight, assumptions get questioned, and a single swing turns a driveway into a courtroom. Grab a seat. The credits haven't rolled. This is the first bang. The air in Oak Creek Estates smelled manicured. Fresh cut lawns, trimmed hedges, engines of distant mowers murmuring like contented bees. It was the odor of wealth and certainty, a curated calm that suggested bad news belonged somewhere else, past the wrought iron arches and the guardhouse. For Raymond Carter, that scent promised a reset. At 55, after a career that carried him from grimy street cases to sterile conference rooms in Washington, this brick colonial felt like his dividend. Here, his daughter Malia could peddle loops without scanning for danger, and his wife Selina could work in rose soil instead of constant worry. Here, lungs could fill all the way. The SUV door sighed open. Hope felt tangible, something you could fold and put away, ready for the ordinary. On moving day, even the breeze seemed choreographed, a soft promise that the hard years had finally paid off. Ray lifted a carton marked Malia's keepsakes from the Lincoln Navigator's cargo bay, grunting as muscles remembered old gyms and older stress. Inside were albums, stick figure drawings, and the plaster handprints she'd pressed in kindergarten, small crescents where tiny nails once shone blue with sky paint. The heft felt right. It was the weight of time well spent. This, not the house, was the prize. Every snapshot a closing argument against chaos. He breathed through the lift, set the box on the smooth driveway, and steadied his stance. The three-car garage yawned open, sun winking off tool racks and bundled rakes. Their future, still wrapped in newspaper, waited patiently. In the glass of the SUV, he caught himself. Older, broader, lines around the eyes like penciled maps of each hard year. He smiled anyway. Today, he told that reflection, we begin again. He pivoted toward the open garage when a glint nicked his periphery, white and blue easing down the street. A Fairfax County cruiser crawled to a near stop at the curb, facing their new mailbox. Ray froze, the box held mid-chest, and watched. He'd seen it roll by earlier. Curiosity was natural. But the idling changed the air, a low rumble that gnawed at the staged tranquility of the block. The window slid down with a purr. The driver, crew-cut, thick neck, pale eyes permanently narrowed, studied him like a riddle with too few letters. At that distance, the officers said ownership. Ray set the box carefully on the driveway, as if any sudden movement might be interpreted as the wrong chapter. He straightened, wiped his palms against his joggers, and met the stare without blinking. The sun kept shining, but the temperature felt scripted to drop. He'd shrugged off the first pass. New faces on quiet streets draw looks. This felt different. The cruiser didn't roll by. It settled. The engine kept breathing, a slow, territorial sound. The sudden hush that follows a radio being turned down rippled across the lawn. In that pocket of silence, Ray could hear his own breath and the sticky whisper of late summer heat. The door latch clicked. A boot hit pavement. The cop stepped out with the relaxed swagger of someone who believes the block reports to him. Hand resting near his holstered sidearm, he took the scene in like an appraiser. Man, vehicle, house. He wore that look some men practice in mirrors. Authority stretched over insecurity, stitched tight. Ray felt his shoulders square on instinct, the practiced composure that had carried him through worse rooms, settling across his face like armor. Officer Brent Kincaid had patrolled Oak Creek for 6 years. He called it his beat, but he meant his suburb. He knew the gardener's vans by paint scratch, the club's delivery schedule, which labradoodles tugged hardest on leashes. The place purred when kept orderly, and he considered himself the keeper. And this black man in a sweatsuit, unloading a luxury navigator in front of the old Henderson place, read like a misprint, a glitch in the algorithm. Kincaid's instincts had been rewarded whenever he treated glitches like leads. Suspicion kept his world simple. Patterns and errors. Errors needed correcting. He adjusted his belt, squared his stance, and fixed those narrowed eyes on Ray, as if calibration alone could make the picture make sense. Somewhere far off, a mower droned, a metronome for a conversation that hadn't started yet. Order, he believed, depended on moments exactly like this. Afternoon? Kincaid called, voice pitched a notch louder than neighborly. Ray placed the box down, careful as if glass were inside, and rose to his full height. He offered a short nod that neither invited nor refused. Kincaid killed the engine, and the sudden quiet tightened the scene like a lens twist. He swung the door wide and climbed out, palm draping casually over the pistol grip. Every movement had choreography, dominance disguised as routine. Just moved in? He asked. Just now, Ray answered, steady, clipped, the tone of a man who knows how fast rooms can tilt. He'd spent 3 decades learning not to telegraph adrenaline. Control, held cleanly, saves lives. The cop's gaze drifted from the stacked brick to Ray's shoes to the navigator's trim, processing numbers that refused to add. He smiled without warmth, as though he'd discovered a bent nail in perfect trim. Big place, Kincaid said, eyes not on the architecture, but on the man in front of it. He took in the polished SUV, Ray's athletic frame, the unhurried confidence in his posture. The math didn't balance in Kincaid's private ledger. Must be doing all right, he added, letting the implication hang like smoke. How'd you afford this echoed without being spoken? Ray met the gaze levelly. We're grateful, he said, nothing more. He would not audition for acceptance on his own driveway. Kincaid stepped closer, boots crunching the decorative gravel, close enough for Ray to see wiry blonde hairs on his forearms and the sheen of heat along his temples. Mind showing some ID? A lot of break-ins lately. Just verifying you are who you say you are, he recited, the kind of script that sounds official from a distance. The engine dead, the stage felt small and intimate, as if the cul-de-sac had narrowed to 2 breaths. Kincaid let his hand rest near the Glock, not grabbing, merely hinting. Every twitch said, I'm in charge. Ray stood with his feet set shoulder width, palms easy by his sides, body language tuned to neutral. It was the posture of someone who'd outlasted interrogations, audits, and panicked midnights. The officer's smile sharpened. Let's see that ID, he repeated a little louder, as though volume could make authority lawful. Ray could feel the neighborhood's invisible attention tilt their way, blinds shifting, curiosity puffing like dandelion seeds. This was how a quiet afternoon changes temperature, one man's presumption warming itself on another man's patience. What had been routine unloading suddenly felt like choreography in a play he hadn't auditioned for. Just moved in, Ray repeated evenly. He'd mastered the trick of keeping voice and pulse from shaking hands. Kincaid's eyes kept cataloging him, not like a neighbor, but like an inventory problem. The question wasn't curiosity, it was a hurdle, and Ray was expected to jump. Ray let the quiet stretch, then broke it with a tone that carried no apology. I'm on my property. I haven't committed a crime. The facts were plain. Plain facts often sound like defiance to people committed to a different story. He kept his hands visible, shoulders easy. He wasn't auditioning for innocence, he was asserting it. Kincaid's jaw twitched near the ear, a tell that belonged to bar fights and bruised egos. This driveway, in his mind, had just turned into a stage for compliance. The sun glared off chrome, and the moment held its breath. He studied Ray the way some folks eyeball a locked door that shouldn't be there. Expensive car, athlete's frame, unbothered stance. The arithmetic offended him, Prejudice does fast math and keeps the change. Must be doing fine, he said, tone dipped in suggestion, the unasked question rattling its tin cup. How? Ray refused the bait. We feel fortunate, Tate, he answered, gaze steady, offering no biography for purchase, no explanation required. Kincaid stepped nearer, gravel shifting under boot soles, his proximity designed to make everything feel smaller. Ray could see the fine blonde stubble on his forearms, the sweat purling at the hairline. All tells. ID, the officer said again, smile thinning. Just routine. Routine, Ray knew, was too often a costume worn over something uglier. He let silence answer for him, a choice that always infuriates men who confuse questions with commands. Mind if I see some identification? Just verify you are who you say, Kincaid said, nodding toward the house. Lots of break-ins lately. Can't be too careful? It was fiction, and both men knew Oak Creek hadn't logged a break-in in years. This was challenge masquerading as diligence. Ray felt anger coil, familiar and tired, but he kept it leashed. He was a husband, a father, standing on his own concrete, not a suspect. I'm not required to present ID on my property, and I've committed no offense, he replied, voice flat as a statute. The law was simple, which is why it often got ignored in favor of ego. Kincaid didn't hear law. He heard a black man setting a boundary. His jaw hardened, a small muscle ticking like a second hand. The temperature of the moment went up a degree. That so? Kincaid said softly. He translated calm citation into defiance. He'd spent a career mistaking boundaries for challenges. The jaw muscle near his ear twitched again, the telltale metronome of a temper that dressed itself as policy. From my perspective, he continued, I see a suspicious individual at a residence. Could be a mover casing the joint. Ray gestured toward the garage with an open hand, revealing Selina in the doorway, worry pleading her brow. My wife is right there, he said. My daughter's inside. Kincaid's glance slid past Selina as if women were scenery. The focus stayed welded to Ray, hot and narrow. He was a hammer that only saw nails. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be, he added, inching closer. His boots creaked on the gravel, each step an announcement that he intended to win. I'm not a suspect. I'm a homeowner on my property, Ray said, keeping the temperature low. He stated it the way one reads a measurement. No heat, no commentary. Lawful doesn't always translate, especially to men chasing obedience. Kincaid took the words like a shove. He stepped closer, breath smelling faintly of burnt coffee, eyes narrowed to hard winter. You refusing a lawful order? He asked. I'm asking you to leave us to our moving, Ray replied, not moving an inch. The line was drawn with a carpenter's pencil, visible, clean. The officer's nostrils flared. Ego, not statutes, had begun steering the wheel. From the garage, boxes waited like patient jurors. The trimmed hedges held their breath. Silence stacked up between them, precarious as glass. In that hush, Ray calculated outcomes the way trained minds do, choosing the path least likely to scar his family. Is that so? Kincaid's lip curled, the twitch near his ear ticking like a metronome wound too tight. From my perspective, I see a suspicious individual at a residence. For all I know, you're with a moving crew, casing the joint. Ray gestured toward the garage, palm open, deliberate. Selina hovered in the doorway, worry pleating her brow. My wife is right there. My daughter's inside. Kincaid barely flicked a glance at Selina. She was background to the story he'd already written. He stepped closer, boots nesting into gravel, breath sour with burnt coffee. Let's keep this simple, he said, tone turned to steel. Show me your ID. Ray's voice stayed even. I'm on my property. I've broken no law. The words were clean, factual, non-negotiable. Kincaid heard only boundary and disrespect. In the quiet between them, the neighborhood listened, blinds tilting, curiosity collecting like dew. The pause lengthened until it vibrated. A lone sparrow chattered, then cut off as if even birds respect a fuse. Kincaid rolled his shoulders and pushed deeper into Ray's space, heat radiating, posture squared for dominance. You don't turn your back on me, he said in a voice meant for small rooms and quick capitulations. Ray didn't step back. He had taught younger agents about moments exactly like this, the crosswind where pride tries to pass itself off as procedure. Officer, he said, low and steady, you're escalating this for no reason. Kincaid's hand hovered just off his duty belt. A conversational threat. The air felt denser, pressure rising before a storm nobody ordered. Selena's fingers tightened around the doorframe. Inside, a glass clinked in a box, a tiny bell marking the stakes. Ray's calm had edges now, not sharp, but definite, a boundary drawn in plain daylight. Ray weighed the two roads, hand over the ID and eat the insult, or stand firm and show Malia that rights aren't favors to be begged for. He looked toward Selena, and the fear in her eyes pricked him like wire. Peace was the promise he'd made her, peace without barter. He faced Kincaid again. We can stand here walking the Fourth Amendment all afternoon, he said, tone even as a level, but my boxes don't unpack themselves. To Kincaid, practicality translated as weakness. He leaned in, a thin smile like a cut. That your final word? He asked. My final word is you have no probable cause, Ray replied. The line sat between them, bright as chalk. Somewhere down the block, a mower throttled down to silence, leaving only breath and heat. The moment felt like a match head waiting on friction. From the garage, Selena's voice sliced the air. Ray, please, just show him. It's not worth it. Her plea carried years of midnight alarms and late flights. 1,000 small fears accumulated like lint in pockets. Ray glanced at her, and she saw the calculation flicker, principle measured against the safety she'd been promised. Kincaid watched the glance and misread it, smugness sliding across his face. Yeah, he said, smirking. Listen to your wife. Be a good boy and show your papers. Good boy hit like thrown gravel, ugly and deliberate. Any thought of appeasement froze. Ray shook his head once. No. The single syllable landed like a door closing. For a heartbeat, Kincaid seemed startled that a push hadn't moved the world. Then his expression cooled to anger's glossy sheen. He was out of patience, out of words. When talk fails the bully, he reaches for weight. Kincaid unclipped the baton, metal-kissed air with a shing that braided menace and theater. Selena gasped, instinctive, animal. Ray raised his hands to chest height, palms open, fingers spread, the language of peace older than sirens. Officer, think about what you're doing, he said. There is no threat here. Kincaid's voice cracked on adrenaline. You're disorderly. You're refusing to identify. You're obstructing an investigation. He was shouting a report he hadn't written yet. He angled past Ray toward the navigator, baton tip hovering near the driver's glass. Maybe your ID's in the car, he said, because in his world, the law bends to irritation. Ray pivoted, body between weapon and family. That would be an illegal search and seizure, he said, ice in the calm. The baton drifted closer, punctuation poised to end the sentence. Malia's sneaker squeaked on concrete like a tiny alarm. You don't have a warrant, Ray said, steady enough to steady the ground under them. You are not entering my vehicle. Kincaid's eyes sparked with that reckless certainty that confuses volume with justification. This, he said, chin jutting toward the baton, is my warrant. Selena's hand flew to her mouth. Ray widened his stance, a quiet wall built of bone and vow. You're about to make a mistake you won't be able to defend, he warned. Step back. Kincaid flushed blotchy pink, breathing hard, grievance lashed to authority. Stand aside, he ordered, though the words sounded more like need than command. The neighborhood's air changed texture, 100 unseen lenses focusing at once. Ray felt the future trying to right itself and refused the pen. He kept his voice level, soft enough that only one man could hear. Don't do it. In some lives, mercy is the bravest tone. The swing cracked the afternoon. Not a tink, but a concussive pop. that punched silence into the street. The tempered glass didn't fall, it veined into a white starburst, a frozen lightning map. A glitter of shards leaped inward, ticking across the leather like malicious confetti. For a beat, the whole block held its breath, the sparrow mute, the hedges listening, sunlight suspended. Kincaid stood where the baton finished, chest heaving, eyes lit with a theater kid's triumph. Selina made a strangled sound that didn't choose between scream and prayer. Ray stared at the ruined window and felt something old and disciplined click into place, not rage, not shock, but resolve that hardened rather than flared. He looked to the garage where Malia stood, hand over her mouth, the box of memories near her sneaker, like a jury that had already reached its verdict. Ray's anger didn't erupt. It condensed into something cold and load-bearing. The choice was stripped to its studs, surrender or dignity. He was done renting permission on ground he owned. He glanced at Malia, eyes flooding, shoulders trembling, and anchored to the promise he'd made her. You get to be a child here." He turned back to Kincaid. "You just vandalized my property without cause," he said, voice low enough to pull the room to him. "You will account for it." A door across the street opened. Curtains hiccuped. Phones rose like flowers tracking light. Kincaid inhaled that attention like oxygen. Theater swelled his chest. Accountability did not. Ray adjusted his stance, palms still visible, calm not for Kincaid's sake, but for his family's. He thought of training rooms and role plays, of how pride turns bad decisions into reports. He refused to contribute 1 ounce to the spiral. With an audience, Kincaid inflated. He planted the baton like a lectern. "Now, you see," he boomed, projecting for porches and camera mics. "This is what happens when you don't cooperate with law enforcement." He gestured theatrically toward the wrecked window. The glittering snow of safety turned to spectacle. "I gave a lawful order. He refused." Ray didn't feed the crowd. His attention tunneled to Selina and Malia, her arms cocooning their daughter, her mouth whispering, "It's okay," into hair that smelled like new shampoo and cardboard dust. Nothing about this was okay. Ray measured his breath, the way one measures distance to shore. He spoke without raising his voice. "This is over," he said to Kincaid, not as threat, but as a declaration that the driveway would not host more damage. The baton hovered, eager for an encore. Across the street, someone whispered, "Are you getting this?" Selina's voice wavered, pitched to cut through the clamor. "Ray, please." She had weathered too many close calls to mistake showmanship for safety. He met her eyes, and the plea in them hurt worse than the glass. He had promised her mundane Saturdays, roses and bike rides, and quiet arguments about paint colors. The baton's tip glinted with specks of their afternoon. Kincaid heard only his own performance. "You think you're better than the rules?" he demanded, stepping in, blood up. "You move in and think the neighborhood's different for you?" Ray held the stare. "The law isn't different for anyone," he replied. Selina squeezed Malia tighter. The girl's sneaker slid across a chip of glass. It clicked like a metronome, counting down. Ray's shoulders rolled once, resetting. Whatever came next would not come from his temper. He had spent a life refusing to donate fuel to other men's fires. Kincaid smirked, satisfied he'd cornered the day. "Yeah," he said, cruelly pleased. "Listen to your wife. Be a good boy. Show your papers." The phrase landed heavy with a historical stink, meant to shrink a man down to size. Any thought Ray had of handing over his wallet evaporated. He shook his head, deliberate. "No." The syllable was small and absolute, a brick set into a foundation. Kincaid recoiled a hair, as if the word had weight. Then pride snapped back. His jaw clenched. The baton re-angled. He had burned through questions and was down to force. Ray didn't move. He could smell adrenaline on the air, thin and metallic. Inside the house, a box settled with a hollow thump, like a gavel. The neighborhood waited for the next act, some hoping for calm, some for drama. Drama, Ray knew, always tries to pay in blood. Kincaid holstered the script of warnings and reached for action. He didn't go for cuffs or firearm. He swung the baton toward the SUV again, angling for another smash to rattle Ray into submission. Officer, Ray said, tone a notch lower, the way you address someone walking too close to a cliff. Back away from my vehicle. His palms remained up, fingers splayed. The baton hovered. Selena stepped forward on reflex, then stopped when Ray lifted two fingers. A small gesture, meaning stay with Malia. You're obstructing, Kincaid barked, but the word wobbled, as if he could hear how thin it sounded. Ray's calm was infuriating, because it gave no handle to grab. Across the street, an older neighbor whispered, Call the HOA. Another answered, He is the HOA today. The joke didn't land. The air was brittle, ready to splinter at a sentence no one wanted to own. In Kincaid's eyes, Ray saw a familiar pivot. The moment when a man realizes he's not restoring order, he's starring in a grievance. Pride, cornered, prefers escalation to retreat. Step aside, Kincaid ordered, voice fraying. Ray didn't. He breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth, letting the breath iron any tremor from his words. You've made your point, he said. You've also broken the law. He nodded toward the glass-dusted seat. Every lens here saw it. The knowledge of being watched didn't humble Kincaid. It juiced him. He squared up for the crowd, baton lifted like a conductor's wand. This is what noncompliance looks like, he announced to neighbors who wanted lawns, not lessons. Ray glanced at Malia. He would not leave her this memory of him shrinking. He bent his voice until it was almost gentle. Officer, end it now. The baton sang back into the air with that metallic flourish built for drama. Selena's breath hitched. Malia made a sound so small it could have been a hiccup. Ray's body shifted, not to fight, but to shield, turning shoulder on, making himself between baton and family, the geometry of protection. You're escalating a non-event, he said, and the clinical phrase made Kincaid's eyes flare. You're the threat, Kincaid snapped, like a reflex more than a thought. The line sounded practiced, pre-written for a report that would need explaining later. He advanced toward the car again. Ray stepped with him, matching distance without touching, denying the easy claim of assault. The neighborhood felt the choreography. Two men orbiting a ruined window, gravity made of pride and fear. Someone across the street murmured, Just show him. Another answered, No, this is wrong. The street split into a jury. Back up, Kincaid commanded, voice skating on its own edge. Or what? A young man called from a lawn, phone raised. He's on his property. The comment flicked across the scene like a thrown pebble, small but rippling. Kincaid ignored the peanut gallery, eyes glued to Ray, baton angling once more. Ray felt the old training slot into place, the math of angles, the calculation of risk. You'll account for every second of this, he said, not a threat, a promise. Selena drew Malia behind her, a human comma trying to pause a sentence already running. Kincaid's jaw worked. He half turned to the crowd, chest swelling again with borrowed stage light. Refused lawful order, he recited. Escalated. The words sounded like projection hung on a hook. Ray didn't bite. He kept the center of the driveway, a stillness the size of a man who knows the ledger will close. Maybe your ID is in the glove box, Kincaid jeered, and the baton dipped toward the glass-laced interior. The suggestion wasn't procedure, it was provocation dressed as common sense. Step away from my vehicle, Ray repeated, voice like a plumb line, true by nature, not debate. He could feel the heat on his scalp, taste dust and something sharp from the tempered glass. Kincaid's boot nudged a stray shard. It crackled under rubber like ice on a winter curb. Last chance, the officer warned, though chance belonged to neither of them now. Ray held the gaze. I said no. The syllables stacked atop the earlier no, building a wall that would not trade stones for applause. On the curb, the older neighbor pointed a trembling finger. He broke it, she whispered to no one. Evidence glinted everywhere, glittering, impossible to sweep. The second strike came fast, a whip crack meant to startle more than destroy. It pinged off the fractured mosaic, flinging a fresh spray of diamond dust across the seat. The sound pulled a soft curse from someone's porch. Selina flinched, but Ray didn't break. "You are done," he said, words dropping slow, heavy, irrefutable. He let them sit between them, a small cairn marking the line. Kincaid's breathing rasped loud enough to record. The performance high had stopped lifting. It was now forcing him to choose between face and law. He planted his baton tip on the driveway, as if staking property. "You brought this on yourself," he said, the old gospel of blame. Ray's reply didn't rise. "My daughter's watching," he said quietly. "Write the report you want her to read." The sentence landed harder than a shout. Across the street, a phone lowered an inch. For a heartbeat, Kincaid seemed to consider the exit ramp. Then ego yanked the wheel back. "Step away from the car," he repeated, like repetition alone could make it lawful. The crowd felt the loop, a record skipping. Ray kept his hands up, palms open to every camera, to every neighbor who'd rewatched this at dinner. "We're done here," he said, not to Kincaid, but to the day, to the version of events that had pretended to be inevitable. The sun burned against his neck. Sweat drew a line down his spine. Malia's breathing hitched, audible in the uncanny hush. The maple leaves trembled, though there was no wind. Kincaid shifted his weight, seeking a new angle, a new pretext. He found none. Pride hates physics. It hates the stubbornness of facts. "Final warning," he said anyway, because some men would rather echo than yield. The neighbors had multiplied. 2 doors down, a couple in golf polos. Across the street, an elderly man with a hose gone flaccid on the lawn. Phones pointed like sunflowers. "You okay?" someone called toward Selina. She nodded a brittle nod that meant no. Ray could feel the neighborhood splitting, people who wanted proof that their order was benevolent, and people learning in real time how order gets enforced. He rolled his shoulders again, a whisper of motion. "Officer," he said, "walk away." The baton rose instead, a metronome for bad choices. "Stop resisting," Kincaid declared, the phrase he needed on tape regardless of reality. Ray didn't move enough to satisfy the word. "This ends with you stepping back," he answered, and the crowd heard it, not defiance, but boundary. Somewhere a child asked, "Why is he breaking their car?" A parent hushed, embarrassed by the obvious question. The crack of the first blow had pulled curtains, the quiet, after-pulled judgment. Kincaid pivoted toward the audience, shoulders squared, chest out, the baton an exclamation point. "You see," he called, "this is what happens when directions are ignored." The line sounded practiced, because it was, a patch kit for holes in cause. Ray ignored the theater and counted breaths, 4 in, 6 out. He put weight into the stillness, letting it grow heavier than the show. "We're finished," he told Kincaid again, the tone that tells an argument there's nothing left to find. Selina kissed the top of Malia's head without thinking, a benediction against memory. Glass winked in the grass like a field of tiny eyes. The moment balanced on a thin edge, 1 sentence away from a reportable injury, 1 sentence away from retreat. The street waited, engines quiet, sprinklers ticking somewhere off stage. A few residents edged closer, not brave, just curious, the way people drift toward a siren they hope is for someone else. "Officer, he's got his hands up," a woman said, half to herself, half to her camera. Kincaid kept his gaze locked on Ray, refusing any fact that didn't flatter his version. The role required crescendo. "Final chance," he repeated, thicker now, the words slogging through their own redundancy. Ray's reply was simple. "No." He didn't lace it with insult. He didn't feed it heat. The syllable did its work alone. A breeze finally made it through the hedges and moved the glitter on the seat. It looked like frost in July. Ray focused on that odd beauty for a second, a single stitch of calm to hold. The officer's nostrils flared. Pride demanded one more scene. The street, collectively, did not want it. Kincaid lifted the baton again, lungs working like bellows. "He's not resisting," a man blurted, nerves outrunning caution. The truth hung there, bright and inconvenient. Kincaid feinted toward the doorframe, trying to conjure a new justification, then faltered. The script had run out of fresh lines. He turned back to the crowd, struggling to feed the echo chamber. Lawful order, he said. Noncompliance. The words now sounded like labels peeled from old jars. Ray took a half step angled toward the garage, not retreating, recalibrating, to keep himself between the baton and his family. Enough, he said, not shouted, said, as if the word possessed its own gravity. It did. Some shoulders in the crowd dropped a fraction. The spell of performance kinked. For the first time, Kincaid looked unsure whom he was performing for, the neighbors, the camera, or the heat building behind his own eyes. Ray didn't look at the phones, the glitter, or the baton. He looked at his family, then spoke to the only person who could end this. This is over, he said, voice low and dangerous in the way a cliff is dangerous. Unmovable, obvious, final. The phrase wasn't theater, it was a boundary closing. Kincaid's chest still heaved, but the neighborhood's silence had thickened into a mirror. In it, his reflection wasn't a guardian, just a man breaking a window to win an argument. The baton lowered a notch, uncertainty chipping pride. Across the street, the elderly neighbor finally exhaled. Sprinklers resumed somewhere, a hiss like a curtain. Selina held Malia, eyes wet but unblinking. End it, Ray repeated, not begging. Gravity did the rest. Performances crave applause. This one had none to offer. The day, exhausted, refused another act. The scene held, balanced, waiting, done. You've assaulted me and wrecked my property. You're finished, Ray said. Kincaid barked a laugh, rough and humorless. Finished? I'm the one with the badge and the gun. You're the one going to jail. He holstered the baton, unclipped his cuffs, and snapped them open. The cold, predatory clack rolled across the lawn like a gavel. Turn around, hands behind your back, he ordered, swagger swelling now that he had an audience. You're under arrest for obstruction and resisting. Ray's composure thinned to disbelief. You're arresting me on my own driveway, in front of my family. The absurdity should have stopped things. Instead, it accelerated them. Kincaid's pupils were tight with adrenaline, breathing fast like a runner late to a finish line no one else could see. Neighbors shifted, phones poised, recording a certainty that didn't match the law. The cuffs flashed in sunlight, like a small, merciless moon. Turn, hands back, Kincaid repeated, voice flat with counterfeit inevitability. You can't be serious, Ray said, the words tasting like metal. You, intend to cuff a homeowner you just assaulted? Kincaid's jaw worked. Obstruction of justice, resisting a lawful order. He was reciting a script he'd already promised himself he'd follow. Ray let the silence stretch, letting the camera mics eat it. Lawful? He asked. You smashed my window. The officer's eyes flared. You did this to yourself, he said, a reflexive catechism for bad decisions. Selina's breath trembled at the garage threshold. Malia clung to her mother's wrist, grip small and fierce. Ray kept his hands visible, chest quietly rising. The cuffs hovered, their hinge flashing with ugly promise. The block, so proud of its curated calm, waited for a climax that should never have been possible. Kincaid's nostrils flared. Performance demanded completion. For what? Being a stubborn fool who doesn't know his place? Kincaid snapped, mask slipping as rage wrote the lines. He lunged, clamping Ray's left wrist and wrenching for leverage. The maneuver was crude, powered by ego rather than technique. Ray's muscles hardened. He could have ended this in two clean beats, thumb rotation, wrist lock, knee dip, precise, minimal, lawful self-defense. He didn't. He let the first torque pass and brought his arm back without a counterstrike. The calculus was brutal. One touch from him, and the narrative would flip on contact. 100 lenses would recut the scene. Unruly suspect, brave cop, chaos tamed. Ray had seen that movie. He wouldn't fund another screening. He stabilized his stance, feet set like anchors, breath measured. He'd give them stillness, not struggle. Kincaid's grip tightened, face flushing. sweat standing like a rash along his hairline. Training whispers to the body long after classrooms are gone. Ray had been taught by experts who understood that violence sometimes arrives dressed as procedure. He could flip Kincaid, strip the baton, break a wrist. Those were just motions. But motion belongs to the man who needs it. Instead, he gave gravity, his trust. He didn't flinch, didn't shove, didn't give the camera a frame that could be cropped into a lie. He let Kincaid shove him against the navigator's flank. The fractured safety glass scratched his shoulder through cotton. Stop resisting, Kincaid grunted, breath hot, voice hoarse with effort. I'm not resisting, Ray answered through his teeth. I'm standing still. The line carried like a bell. Silence moved across hedges and porches. You could hear sprinkler heads clicking awake somewhere down the block. The cuffs skated cold across his skin, hungry for closure. Kincaid had weight and leverage. Ray had balance and core. It made for a slow, humiliating physics where the smaller man didn't fold and the larger man didn't win. Ray held the middle, no dead weight, no compliance, just a quiet veto written in posture. Hold still, Kincaid growled, trying to force both wrists together, breath coming in ragged bursts. I am holding still, Ray said, voice flint dry. The tableau turned surreal. A pristine cul-de-sac recast as proscenium, neighbors become audience, and every phone a witness for the world. Selina shook herself from shock. Get your hands off my husband, she cried, stepping out from the garage's shadow. He did nothing. You're the one breaking the law. The words were a flare, heads tilted, lenses panned. The story was slipping away from Kincaid's grasp, and he could feel it. Back off, or you're next, Kincaid snapped, angling his shoulder to block Selina while clawing Ray's wrists together. The threat came out high and splintered, urgency smearing his authority. He had to get the cuffs on. He had to finish the scene he'd started. He leaned harder, trying to force bone to meet bone, scraping the cuff along Ray's skin until it grazed wrist bone with a cold bite. The officer's face hovered inches away, red, damp, triumphant, and desperate at once. Ray's eyes stayed level. He could smell Kincaid's breath, stale coffee, adrenaline. The edge was here, and edges decide things. Enough, Ray said, not loud, not soft, just true. A hush stitched itself through the spectators. The neighborhood could feel the barometer fall, the pressure shift. Kincaid's hands paused for a quarter second, twitching between stubbornness and sense. No rescue was coming from courtesy or reason. Ray recognized the pivot. This was the last moment before whatever came next would have to live on replay. He let his body loosen, a sudden slackness that read, to a man seeking compliance, like surrender. Kincaid's grip eased half an inch in reflex. In that fractional opening, Ray turned, not to strike, but to realign, to face the man trying to script him. That's enough, he said. 2 words, flat as a verdict. Kincaid blinked. The unexpected confidence jarred his equilibrium the way a misstep snaps an ankle. His fingers still hooked the cuff, but purpose wavered. Ray lifted his chin a notch. He let the block see his face. He let his family see him, refusing to vanish. Sometimes authority isn't loud, it's gravitational. It tilts a room, and everything in it slides toward truth. He drew breath for the choice he'd hoped never to make on this street. For weeks, he'd planned to be just a husband and father here, a man who debated mulch colors and grill temperatures, who taught his daughter a better route for looping the cul-de-sac. Kincaid had torn that mask off with one swing. So Ray stood in what remained. We're done, he said, gaze not leaving the officer. He lifted his free hand slowly, deliberately, telegraphing openness to every lens. Kincaid tensed, mouth forming a warning. Don't even... Gun, he spat, voice strangled by fear and theater. Ray's right hand came out not with a weapon, but with a small black bifold. The leather caught the light with a workman's sheen. He flipped it open with his thumb, practiced and calm. He didn't flourish it. He presented it like evidence. The rectangle sat between them like a quiet explosion. It wasn't a driver's license. It wasn't local tin. Nestled in leather, heavy and unmistakable, was a shield, gold, not chrome. Its eagle's wings flared, talons poised above a field of scrollwork. The design did its own talking, the way seals and signatures do. The hinge of the wallet revealed credentials, crisp and unambiguous, side by side. Kincaid's eyes locked on the metal, then skipped to the paper, then back again, circuitry sparking. The stage he'd been directing slid out from under his boots. No, he muttered, denial trying to reboot reality. The cul-de-sac seemed to lean closer, every phone's frame adjusting focus. Ray didn't add commentary. He held the wallet at a respectful distance, steady enough for anyone to read, steady enough to hang a career on. Time changed texture. Kincaid stared, the adrenaline still storming his bloodstream, colliding with the need to process letters into meaning. He saw the eagle and hated what it implied. He saw the seal and pretended it could be fake. The mind, when it can't afford truth, bargains with absurdity. What is this? A joke? He scoffed, but the scoff came out thin, almost childlike. The badge didn't blink. Neither did Ray. He kept his arm extended, hand steady, letting hardware do what words could not. The cuffs, still dangling from Kincaid's left hand, ticked against each other like a nervous habit. A neighbor whispered, "Oh my God," as if the phrase were new. Selena's shoulders eased a fraction, terror trading places with recognition. Malia's eyes were huge and shining, watching her father stand inside a role he never wanted to bring home. Kincaid reached for the thin thread of bravado he had left. "Impersonating a federal officer, you think that's funny?" he said, voice wobbling. Ray met him with silence first, silence that suggested if words came, they would be receipts. He turned the wallet a touch, enough to align light on the credential pane. "Read," he said, one syllable, clean and heavy. Kincaid's gaze dropped to the commission, to the embossed text, to the photo in formal suit. Same jawline, same eyes, none of the sweat. Names in official type never shout. They sit there, absolute. The title below it was the kind that rearranges rooms. The sound in the cul-de-sac damped, as if the air itself wanted to hear. Kincaid's throat moved. His fingers, suddenly clumsy, loosened on the cuffs. The metal mouthed the driveway and rang like a bell tolling for a bad idea. "Raymond L. Carter," Kincaid read, the syllables sand in his mouth. Below the name, the words he'd mocked into impossibility. Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Color sluiced out of his face, leaving it flat and waxy, like a bad mannequin left in the sun. The swagger collapsed as if someone pulled a pin. He stepped back as though distance could unring bells. His hands lifted off Ray as though burned, palms open in reflexive surrender. On porches and lawns, people who'd assumed a tidy story watched that story crack down the middle. The power in the driveway rotated like a weather vane in a gust. Ray closed the wallet without hurry and slid it inside his jacket. "My name is Raymond Carter," he said softly, verdict calm. "And you, Officer Kincaid, just authored the worst decision of your career." The neighbors couldn't hear the words, but they could read the transformation. They saw a cop who'd swaggered now stumble. They saw the handcuffs lying on the concrete like dropped hubris. They saw the man they'd been told was a problem stand, with a quiet authority that made the baton look like a toy. Kincaid's hands trembled so hard, his radio stuttered against his palm as he fumbled for the push to talk. "Dispatch, I request supervisor to immediate," he choked, the baritone gone, replaced by a thin reed of panic. Selena pulled Malia an inch closer, eyes pinned to Ray's profile. She knew his title, of course, but she'd never seen what it looked like as armor. Malia stared at her father as if a hidden room in their house had just opened, terrifying, astonishing, irrevocably real. The cul-de-sac held its breath, and then reality resumed. Ray bent, lifted the box labeled Malia's keepsakes, and turned toward the garage. He didn't look at Kincaid again. There was nothing left to say to him. "Selena," he said, voice back to ordinary, "let's go in. The officer will wait for his supervisor." He walked past the ghost-pale man in uniform as if he were a lawn ornament, A thing on property, not authority. The message carried farther than any speech. We are done here. He stepped into the cool hallway, the familiar scent of cardboard and lemon oil wrapping the moment in domestic dignity. Somewhere down the road, a siren wound up, thin at first, then swelling, a dirge for a career already pronounced. Outside, lenses stayed up, capturing an ending that didn't need shouting. Inside, Ray set the box down carefully, the world narrowing back to what mattered. The house inhaled, steadying. For a long beat, Kincaid just stared. The words and the metal wouldn't harmonize. His brain ran them separately like clashing tracks. He saw the eagle, read the embossed lines, but comprehension skidded like a car hydroplaning across facts. Fake, he muttered, though the credentials, microprint, and hologram argued back. You think this is funny, Varto? He said, but the fury had gone watery. Ray didn't blink. He let the silence stack until it had weight. A phone somewhere caught the light. A neighbor whispered, "Is that real?" "Read the commission," Ray said, voice unhurried, elemental. Kincaid's eyes dropped again, mapping letters to the man before him. The comparison resolved. Same jaw, same eyes. The calm of someone who doesn't bluff. The handcuffs slipped, chiming on concrete like a tiny funeral bell. The baton hung useless, a prop from the wrong play. Power, so noisy a minute ago, turned quiet. What is this novelty crap? Kincaid tried again, but the line had no oxygen. His grip on Ray's arm loosened, fingers lifting like they'd touched a hot stove. "Impersonation's a felony," he added, pitching the accusation toward the porches. Ray tilted the wallet so even cheap phone cameras could drink in the seals. "Read the name, then the title," he said. The instruction landed with teacherly patience that felt somehow like mercy. Kincaid looked. He didn't want to, but he did. The credentials were not the kind you buy. They're the kind that change furniture placement in a room. He mouthed the name, reached the line below it, and stalled. The color evacuated his face. The cuffs clattered fully to the driveway, rolling until one ring caught on a pebble. Across the street, an older neighbor muttered, "Lord," and crossed herself. Kincaid staggered a half step back, as if the truth had mass. He tried denial one more time, because men drowning grab anything. "No, it's you." The sentence never found a verb. Ray closed the wallet and slipped it away with the same neat movement he'd used to open it. "My name is Raymond Carter," he said evenly. "Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The cul-de-sac heard anyway, through air that suddenly carried sound like glass. Kincaid's hands floated up, palms empty, a reflex older than training. He looked briefly, like a boy who'd broken a stained glass window and realized the saint was watching. The swagger that had strutted about reasonable suspicion now sagged, a costume gone threadbare. "Dispatch," he croaked into his radio, fingers fumbling. "Request. Supervisor. Immediate." The baritone had vanished. A reedy panic whistled in its place. Selina's shoulders lowered an inch. Malia exhaled, a tremor leaving her like static. The badge put everything into hard focus. Lenses corrected, whispers sharpened into sentences. Neighbors who'd wanted tidy moral math watched the equation invert. Kincaid, chalk pale, stepped away like proximity might cure consequence. The cuffs lay between them, one open mouth, one closed, glinting with a verdict neither needed spoken. Ray bent, lifted the Malia's keepsakes box, and turned toward the garage. "Selina," he said, ordinary again, "let's go inside. The officer will wait for his supervisor." He passed Kincaid without a glance, the way one steps around a sprinkler head. Present, irrelevant. The message carried. This conversation had moved above his pay grade. Inside, cool air met cardboard and lemon oil. The house felt like a decision. Outside, the block's curated quiet felt stagey, the facade showing its nails. From far off, a siren unwound, thin at first, then swelling, like a promise racing to catch up with facts. Kincaid stood in the driveway's center, radio in a shaking hand, baton still extended uselessly at his side. The neighbors had become a silent amphitheater, their phones lifted like votive candles. He tried to square his shoulders and found the geometry gone. The script, refuse compliance, assert authority, create cause, had hit a line it couldn't cross. The officer swallowed. Unit 12 on scene, the radio crackled back. Supervisor en route. He stared at the shattered window, at the glitter in the seat, at his own reflection broken across 1,000 safety glass facets. Ray's voice, soft but irrefutable, replayed in his head. You just authored the worst decision of your career. He imagined the report. It read like a confession with section headers. Somewhere behind him, a neighbor's hose coughed to life, water snaking across grass, as if the suburb were determined to resume its rituals. Ray set the box on the console table, feeling the familiar weight of fatherhood and the unfamiliar weight of bringing work home like a storm cloud. Selena hovered, eyes still bright with fear and fury. You okay? She asked, voice small but steady. He breathed once, twice. I am, he said. She? Selena glanced at Malia, who had edged 2 steps into the hallway, torn between awe and upset. I'm here, their daughter said, brave as fresh paint. Ray nodded. Good. He hated that they'd seen the badge as shield, not symbol. He'd promised them a boring life behind those iron gates, roses and Saturday chores, and neighborly nods. Outside, sirens thickened, a Doppler braid pulling the block tighter. Ray rested both hands on the carton's cardboard lid, as if steadying a table in a mild quake. The house, still new, still echoing, felt like a witness, swearing the truth. On the lawn, Kincaid pivoted toward the growing crowd, searching faces for a lifeline he'd already burned. Everyone back, he called, but the note of command wouldn't hold. It fluttered like a loose shingle. He stooped to grab the cuffs and missed them the first time. The second try, he lifted them as if they were evidence from someone else's case. The siren's song rose into the block. A supervisor, a car with stripes, a ladder of rank to climb down. He pushed the baton into its ring, too late to matter, and wiped a forearm across his brow. The cameras didn't blink. He had thought an audience would crown him. It had only recorded him. He pictured IA interviews, charges recited, words like excessive and unreasonable, and deprivation of rights under color of law. The phrases had always sounded academic. Today they sounded like doors closing. The first unit arrived, lights painting the manicured hedges in jittery red and blue. A sergeant stepped out, 50s, square, eyes that had seen every kind of mistake. He took in the fractured window, the neighbors, the dropped cuffs, and Kincaid's color. Report, he said, the syllable all gravel. Kincaid started fast, then stumbled, the story collapsing under its own contradictions. The sergeant's gaze tightened. He's inside, a neighbor volunteered, incredulous reverence in the pronoun. Director Carter. The title landed like a gavel. The sergeant looked toward the open door, lips thinning. He adjusted the radio at his shoulder, then turned quietly to Kincaid. Holster that ego, he said, almost kindly, and don't speak unless spoken to. He approached the threshold with the care of a man visiting a chapel after breaking a window. Inside, Ray waited in the foyer, not hostile, not welcoming, simply present still. Director Carter, the sergeant said, standing just inside the shade, hat in hand. The old school respect threaded the moment back onto rails. Sir, I'm here to ensure this is handled properly. Ray inclined his head. Then we're already ahead, he said. He didn't add anything about windows or wrists. The glass spoke. The sergeant's eyes flicked to Selena, then to Malia, then back to Ray. He winced, a human reflex, not a legal one. We'll secure the scene, document, and notify command, he said. I'd appreciate a brief statement when you're ready. After my family sits, Bantam, Ray replied, the conditions soft but firm. Of course. The sergeant backed a half step, nodded, and turned to face the block. Everyone, please lower your phones. There will be an investigation, he announced, the voice that had managed crowds after car wrecks and football games. Some phones lowered. Not all. Outside, Kincaid keyed his mic again with shaking hands. 12 to command. Advise, media presence growing. The channel answered with clipped professionalism, indifferent to his unraveling. The sergeant dispatched 2 officers to cordon the driveway and start logging statements. He kept Kincaid close, not out of solidarity, but containment. "You'll sit in the car," he said, voice neutral. "You will not speak to anyone." Kincaid nodded too hard. He was learning the choreography of disgrace. Small circles, lowered gaze, hands visible. In the foyer, Ray guided Selena and Malia to the couch. He poured water they didn't know they needed. "We're okay," he said, as much to himself as to them. On the street, sirens faded as additional units parked. A drone of distant news vans began, the professional cousin of neighborhood curiosity. The block, built for privacy, discovered what spectacle feels like. A minute stretched, then another. The sergeant approached again, formal, without stiffness. "Sir, we'll need photos of the vehicle and the damage," he said. "Then, with your permission, your statement." "You have it," Ray answered, and gestured to an officer with a camera. The shutter's click sounded polite, apologetic. Selena watched through the doorway, jaw set. Malia traced the seam on the couch with a thumbnail. "Breath evening." "When will IA take this?" Ray asked. "Now," the sergeant said. "I've already called it." He hesitated. "Sir, for what it's worth—" He didn't finish. The worth was obvious, and words would cheapen it. Ray spared him the scramble. "Thank you for stepping in," he said. Across the street, the elderly neighbor finally rolled her hose off the lawn, as if normalcy could be coiled and stored. The sun crept. The drawn-out afternoon refused to end on schedule. Ray followed the sergeant outside, gave a short, precise statement. Arrival time, interaction points, baton swings, verbal content. He spoke in paragraphs that sounded like sworn testimony even before they were. The sergeant didn't interrupt. When they finished, the officer looked at the shattered window and exhaled through his nose. "We'll be in touch," he said, a phrase that, for once, wasn't a dodge. Ray nodded, then turned, lifting the keepsakes box again. As he crossed the threshold, a second siren bloomed in the near distance, thinner, faster. An ambulance that wouldn't be needed, and a signal the story had outrun the scene. Inside, the hallway felt calmer, like a room after a storm, shutters itself, and counts rafters. Ray set the box down and slid his thumb beneath the tape to open it. Photographs, drawings, plaster handprints. The ordinary, lying in wait, patient as stone. The footage went live by dusk. Stitched angles, captions stacked, hashtags marching. In less than an hour, Carter, director, Fairfax, and Kincaid trended in a carousel that never sleeps. The clip had a cruel screenwriter's elegance, a calm homeowner, an escalating cop, the crack of glass, the hush, the gold badge appearing like a plot twist prayer. Networks cut to it. Anchors lowered their voices and raised their eyebrows. Commentators performed instant analysis like parlor tricks, but the pictures did their own homework. Strangers who'd never heard of Oak Creek enlarged the video and learned its hedges by shape. For Kincaid, the consequences arrived at broadband speed. Before the sergeant's incident log finished saving, a statement from the department, somber font, brisk phrasing, announced immediate suspension pending investigation. The uniform that had felt like armor became, in a paragraph, a costume looking for a rack. By morning, the command staff wore the strained look of people who understand reputational math. Internal affairs moved with a haste not born of panic, but of clarity. The videos were unambiguous. The sergeant's report matched the pixels. Kincaid's notes, when compared, read like a man trying to knit a parachute on the way down. Within 72 hours, a press conference. Terminated for cause. Terms like gross misconduct, excessive force, and civil rights violation climbed a podium and stood behind microphones. The union rep frowned, then said little, The air around the room did not welcome rhetorical acrobatics. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice, nudged by a sibling agency that didn't need to write its request in ink, opened a federal inquiry. The phrases changed key: deprivation under color of law, willful violation, pattern, or practice. The language of accountability stopped sounding abstract and started sounding like calendar dates. The indictment came sealed, then unsealed, then printed on 1,000 home screens, tidy as any recipe. The person who'd vowed to fasten cuffs on a driveway now wore them quietly in a hallway. Arraignment was brief. The charges read clean and heavy. The judge's eyebrows flicked once. Kincaid pleaded, then stood there while bail conditions parsed him like a spreadsheet. The internet did what it does: memes, moralizing, mess. But the courtroom was stripped of all that noise. Facts walked in, took seats, and folded their hands. Evidence screens lit, multiple angles, synced audio. The baton's arc captured from 3 porches. "Stop resisting!" juxtaposed with a man standing still. The jury watched, leaned forward, and learned details they already knew. When your day is televised from 12 yards away, you don't argue interpretation, you argue lighting. Lighting rarely acquits. The calendar page turned toward sentencing. The trial wasn't long enough to become a soap opera. It didn't need to. The government laid the elements in tidy rows. The defense tried to plant doubt between them and found concrete. The verdict came like a door latch: simple, decisive, guilty. Sentencing followed after the required ritual of statements and scales. The judge spoke about trust, about how authority is a loan from the public with interest paid in restraint. He spoke about how fear is not a legal theory. 4 years in federal custody, restitution ordered, $20,000 for damage and distress. The dollar figure, a symbol, not a salve. Kincaid nodded once, his face the color of wet paper. He was led away, and the sound of his footsteps was unremarkable, like any other human, leaving a room he no longer controlled. Cameras waited outside. The courthouse bricks absorbed the afternoon. A week later, under the bright, polite lights of the Hoover Building's briefing room, Ray stood at the podium he'd hoped to reserve for policy and progress, not personal history. He wore his usual dark suit, a uniform that smells like wool and responsibility. Cameras clicked. "A few weeks ago," he began, voice steady, "my family moved into a new home. We were excited to start a quieter chapter." He let the breath between sentences carry meaning. That quiet was broken not by a criminal, but by a police officer who saw a black man and called it probable cause. He didn't dramatize. He didn't need to. The footage had already done the staging. "Millions don't have the shield I carry," he said. "They don't have a video. They don't have a press room." The line hung soft and heavy. "We owe them better than slogans and after the fact regrets." He talked training, real, scenario grounded, not box checking PowerPoints. He talked about supervision that intervenes before pride becomes policy. He talked about accountability that doesn't only bloom when cameras do. "Equal justice under law isn't a motto," he said. "It's a maintenance schedule." He announced a joint task force with DOJ, one built to examine patterns, traffic stops that map onto demographics, use of force that spikes near invisible borders, discipline that evaporates under arbitration. The point wasn't a press release, it was plumbing. Systems leak where you don't look. "This begins now," he said, and the now had dates attached. He didn't say Kincaid's name. He didn't need to. The country knew it. "We will work with departments ready to change," he added, "and we will compel those who aren't." He took 2 questions about scope and one about timeline, giving answers measured in oversight and audits, not headlines. Reporters shouted follow-ups the way waves reach for shore. Ray stepped back from the podium, not rudely, just finitely. Afterward, in the corridor's hush, he stood by a window long enough to remember sunlight exists independent of breaking news. The building hummed its government hum: elevators, printers, the low thunder of decisions turning into memos. He thought of the driveway, of glass whitening into spiderweb, of Malia's threaded courage beside Selena's bone-deep fury. He hadn't wanted them to see the shield like that, as a wall. He wanted them to know him as a man who grilled on Sundays. He also knew this: you don't get to pick when truth asks for your voice. He straightened his tie, a small ritual that felt like laying a brick. When you can't fix everything, you fix what your hands can reach. Then you start reaching farther. That evening, Oak Creek reclaimed its curated lullaby. The navigator's new window gleamed under porch light, clean, uncracked, a replacement that looked like forgetting. Ray stood in the doorway, shoulder against the jamb, watching Malia circle the cul-de-sac, helmet bobbing, laughter skating across warm air. The tires whispered over asphalt like a promise kept. Selena leaned into him, the kind of lean that says the day is done even when the world still spins. "Do you think any of this changes anything?" she asked quietly. Ray watched their daughter rocket past the mailbox and raise an arm like a victory salute. "It has to," he said. "I won't accept otherwise." Hope, properly held, isn't naive. It's stubborn. It looks at the calendar and decides to keep showing up. The rose bushes by the walk glowed, leaves dark and glossy, thorns unapologetic. The night smelled like cut grass and relief. He thought about Kincaid, not gleefully, not vengefully, but as a data point with a heartbeat. Choices had led him to that driveway. Choices would carry him to a cell. Accountability wasn't a feast. It was a ledger, cold, necessary, boring on purpose. Ray wondered about the first time Kincaid's instincts had been praised for feeling wrong about somebody. Praise misapplied is fertilizer for failure. Inside, a notification blinked across Ray's phone. The task force's first staffing list, names from both agencies, a schedule for outreach. He typed a short reply, nodded at the practical tempo. Enforcement isn't magic, it's repetition. A bat squeaked overhead, night stitching itself together. Malia braked at the curb, pivoted, and shot a grin toward the porch. "One more lap," she called. "Two," Ray answered, smiling. He wanted her to learn endurance framed as fun. Most good things are. The clip kept looping nationwide. An unasked for biography written in pixels. Never mind. If a moment must define you, better it be a line you meant. He read emails from chiefs across the country, some humble, some defensive, a few hostile in polite fonts. He replied to the first set, archived the second, flagged the third for a call that would be gentle and unyielding. "We have to talk about your stop data," he typed more than once. "There's a rhythm to building anything that lasts. Ask, listen, verify, insist. Out front, sprinklers stitched arcs across lawns, drawing silver threads through porch light." Selena squeezed his hand. "You did right," she said. Ray considered the statement. Doing right is seldom a cape. It's more like carrying two buckets without sloshing. "We did," he corrected softly, eyes on their daughter's wobbling headlamp. Families, like task forces, move best in formation. The task force opened shop in a borrowed floor of an old federal building, the hallways smelling of dust and copier toner. Analysts mapped complaint data against geography. Auditors pulled 10 years of discipline files. Trainers built modules with actors who didn't flinch at yelling. The mandate wasn't to punish, it was to prevent by making shortcuts harder than good habits. Ray convened the first meeting, set markers, transparency, timelines, teeth. "We will count what matters," he said. "Then we will make it matter that we count it." He assigned liaisons to departments that asked first, the brave ones who know self-surgery is still surgery. For those who resisted, subpoenas were ready to be sharpened. He went home late, the city lights a grid of patient stars. In the garage, the navigator sat with its new window, an eye that refused to close again. Back in Oak Creek, the HOA issued a perfunctory note about filming on common property. The irony wrote its own replies. Neighbors approached with casseroles and contrition, the human impulse to salve a wound they'd largely watched. Ray thanked them without making it easy. Forgiveness is a muscle. It works best with resistance. One man said, "Not all cops." then flushed when he heard how thin it sounded, even to himself. Ray let the sentence hang, ungreeted. Across the street, the elderly neighbor waved shyly. He waved back, with genuine warmth. Not everyone had cheered a show. Some had witnessed a fact. That evening, Malia practiced figure eights until the porch light made halos in the asphalt powder. Selina trimmed a rose cane and shook her head at a stubborn aphid bloom. Life in its ordinary chores insisted on continuing, which is its own kind of victory. Kincaid's appeal paperwork filed, stamped, and scheduled. Men have a right to try for better endings. The briefs sounded like wishful misreadings of plain text. Ray didn't gloat. Courts don't need cheerleaders, just calendars. He focused on departments that requested audits before the next headline forced them. The task force's early visits found the same patterns in different uniforms: training hours heavy on tactics, light on temperament, supervisors who counted tickets like trophies, arbitration clauses that treated discipline like a game with infinite extra lives. "We're here to fix plumbing," Ray told a skeptical command staff. "If the sink keeps flooding, you stop blaming the water." A captain cracked a reluctant smile. That was something. Malia, at home, announced she wanted to repaint her room. "Blue," she decided. "Ocean." "Done," Ray said, picturing a shade deep enough to hold a steady boat. Reporters kept calling, wanting a fresh quote that would make the arc feel quick. He gave them none. He preferred progress reports dense with numbers that bored pundits and delighted practitioners. "Complaints down 18% since training changes," one memo read. "Use of force fell 23% with new supervisor review." Numbers don't hug, but they heal. Some nights he stood at the window and let the dark do its quiet work. He thought of officers he'd known who carried themselves like lanterns, walking into bad rooms, shining on purpose. He thought of others who'd mistaken a badge for permission. Systems should tilt toward the first kind. He texted Selina a photo of paint swatches. She replied with a rose emoji and a heart, modern hieroglyphs that say we're still us. The driveway outside reflected stars in the new glass. The reflection held. So did the resolve. Not every email was kind. Some accused him of hating police. Others accused him of going soft. Extremes are loud. They rarely steer. He saved one message, a quiet thanks from a patrol officer in a small town who'd used the new training to defuse a traffic stop that started hot and ended with a handshake. "I did what the video taught," the officer wrote. "Felt weird, worked great." That line lived rent-free in Ray's head. He forwarded it to the team with the subject, "Fuel." Wins didn't need to be viral to be true. On Saturday, he and Malia taped edges and rolled oceans onto drywall. Blue bled into corners. Time bled into something softer than outrage. Selina stuck painter's tape butterflies on the ceiling for later. The room smelled like latex and a second chance. Outside, hedges hummed with late summer insects, tireless, ordinary, alive. The navigator's replacement glass stayed unremarkable, which is the point of glass. Some neighbors still glance at it and then away. Embarrassed by the memory, their bodies won't let them delete. That's fine. Memory, properly handled, is a guardrail. The task force ticked forward. Subpoenas served, MOUs signed, pilot programs expanded. He said yes to panels that prioritized practitioners, no to panels built for theater. He met a mother whose son had been fitted for charges and then dropped for lack of cause. He listened because listening is also enforcement. "I want what happened to us to matter," she said. "It does, Arquise," he answered, and meant it as logistics, not balm. Amelia stuck a printout on the fridge, a map of the neighborhood with her bike route zigzagged in marker. "Safe," she'd written beside it. Ray traced the line with a finger and nodded once. "What's the most effective way to blunt implicit bias in law enforcement? Work the plumbing, recruit for temperament, train with stress inoculation scenarios and community actors, supervise in real time with sergeants empowered to pull people off calls mid-shift, measure stops, searches, enforce by officer and beat and publish it, reward de-escalation as loudly as arrests, make arbitration the exception, not the rule." Does the sentence fit what Kincaid did? 4 years won't fix the window. It broke in his own head, and 20 grand won't unstartle a child. But accountability isn't measured in symmetry, it's measured in signal. The signal here was clear. Authority without restraint is trespass. Oak Creek didn't become Eden, but the glass is whole, the roses bloom, the bike loops lengthen, and the system feels a hair more honest under a sun that makes everyone equally visible. That's not victory, it's direction. Lesson 1: Dignity isn't a favor, it's a right. If you've lived long enough to remember crank windows and black and white newscasts, you know calm can be an illusion. In Oak Creek Estates, the lawns were clipped to an inch, the flags were straight, and the silence felt paid in full. Then one bad decision, a baton swung at a family's SUV, shattered more than tempered glass. For those of us 65 and up, the scene rings familiar. A quiet driveway becomes a courtroom, and a man's poise is mistaken for defiance. The lesson is old and stubborn. Dignity does not need permission. It doesn't wear well with good boy, and it doesn't vanish because someone in a uniform raises his voice. Rights aren't courtesy, they're bedrock. We learn that from lunch counters and church steps. We remember the long walk from comply to respect, and we know the difference between authority and control the way we know the weight of a gallon of milk. By feel. Lesson 2: Accountability works best in daylight. What followed felt like a page torn from every decade since Selma. Neighbors with phones, a department forced into the sun, and a career snapping like a dry twig. Some will say the twist, when the homeowner's federal badge appeared, made the difference, but older eyes see the wider truth. The cameras, the witnesses, the paper trail, the supervisor who told a hothead to holster his ego. That is what turns outrage into outcome. Change doesn't arrive on sirens, it arrives on schedules, audits, and training that sticks when the pulse is up. Publish stop data, reward de escalation as loudly as arrests. Let supervisors pull a cop off a call the moment pride outruns policy. We've rebuilt engines and marriages by that same logic: measure, mend, repeat. In a country where reputations once traveled by porch talk and now by broadband, sunlight is still the best disinfectant and the cheapest. Friends, you've seen how one swing on a quiet driveway can echo across a whole neighborhood and a whole country. In your lifetime, when have you witnessed dignity defended or ignored, whether at a lunch counter, a school board meeting, or right there on your front porch? Do you believe real accountability comes from new laws, better training, or from neighbors who refuse to look away? Tell me your story in the comments. If this conversation matters to you, please like, subscribe, and share so more folks, especially our children and grandkids, can learn, weigh in, and help shape what comes next.